Greetings, greetings to everyone. My name is Raymond Tichawia Moruira. I hope everyone is okay. Everyone is blessed. Blessed be the Almighty. Mwari msika vanhu, sarusike. Today I have a teaching, and the teaching that I have today is a very interesting teaching. Yaman Rastafari. The teaching that I have is today I want to talk about African indigenous knowledge systems. I want to teach my black African people. If you are a black man, if you live in Africa, outside of Africa, but if your roots are from Africa and your ethnics are from Africa, and you're a black man, that means you have a totem. And your totem might be a lion, a zebra, a kudu, mbizi, shumba, nzou, elephant, whatever your totem is. If you have a totem, all black African people have totems. And these black African people who have totems are the 12 tribes of Israel. Just like Jesus Christ, the Messiah. He was a black African man from Israel, from Egypt, and then he moved to Israel to stay there with his parents, learning African knowledge, African science, African roots, black science, Pan-Africanism. And his totem was a lion. Even in the Bible it is written, the Lion of the tribe of Judah, meaning that Jesus Christ had a totem, and Jesus Christ was a black African man. So, what are African indigenous knowledge systems? When we talk of African indigenous knowledge systems, we are talking of the systems which we use as black African people ever since the genesis of creation. These systems are political systems, economic systems, social systems, spiritual knowledge, spiritual systems, agricultural systems. These are the systems which make up civilization. There is no civilization without a political government. There is no civilization without an economic system, an economic structure of how natural resources are manufactured and how natural resources are produced and processed and how natural resources are distributed within the community. So when we talk of civilization, we are talking of how people live. So when we talk of African indigenous knowledge systems, we are talking of the natural systems which the black African people have been using ever since the ancient times. Black African people had their own systems, indigenous knowledge systems. When we say indigenous, we mean something which is native, something which is original, something which originated from that region or from that country or from that area. So when we say African indigenous knowledge systems, we are talking of the original systems which we use as black African people ever since the ancient times in every aspect of our lives. So these African indigenous knowledge systems are the systems that black African people are supposed to be using right now. Just look at the society. Look at Africa. African people have lost their identity. African people have lost the knowledge of who they are because African people have forsaken their African indigenous knowledge systems. And black African people have inherited foreign knowledge systems from the Europeans and from the Americans. And black African people have been diluted as a people. They don't have a culture anymore. They don't have a tradition anymore. They do what they see the white men doing. You know, their systems have been corrupted by the Europeans, and black African people have forgotten who they are. So these African indigenous knowledge system comprises of many different ideologies. We're talking of agricultural science, we're talking of art, we're talking of craft skills, we're talking of language, linguistics, we're talking of each and every aspect which makes up the human life. How knowledge is preserved, how we have been preserving knowledge as black African people ever since the ancient times. Knowledge is something which is very important. Knowledge is the blueprint of all things in creation. And a people without knowledge is a people without civilization, because you cannot have civilization when you do not have knowledge. So, how was this knowledge preserved ever since the ancient times? African indigenous knowledge have been documented, have been written down, and this is what we call historical knowledge. And this recorded African knowledge is a knowledge which the people of the past have written down and recorded to preserve this knowledge from getting lost, so that the next generations which are coming in the future might have access to this knowledge. Because if this knowledge is not preserved, that means black African people are going to forget who they are and where they are coming from. And that means if they forget who they are and where they're coming from, that means black African people don't have a vision of where they are going. So African indigenous knowledge systems have been documented, have been written down, and we have so many methods of learning African indigenous knowledge system. Now, today I'm going to talk of only three learning methods of African indigenous knowledge systems. The first learning method of African indigenous knowledge systems is what we call visual or pictorial knowledge, which is knowledge which is written down in a certain language, whether it's an African language or whether it's an African Asiatic language, which is Arabic and Latin. Arabic and Latin are African indigenous languages which were spoken by the Bantu people from the ancient times. You see, when we talk of the Bantu people, we're talking of the 400 ethnic groups which immigrated all over Africa at the beginning of civilization in ancient Egypt. So black African people have a rich history dating back to hundreds and thousands and millions of years ago. And this knowledge has been written down so that it gets preserved, so that this knowledge will not get lost. And this knowledge is the knowledge that black African kingdoms and empires have been using to build their civilizations ever since the ancient times. So we as black African people, we are supposed to preserve our knowledge. We are supposed to teach our knowledge to the younger ones, to the children, to the fathers, to the mothers, to the grandmothers, and to the grandfathers. And the elders are the ones who are responsible for preserving that knowledge, so that the younger generations who are coming up may have spiritual enlightenment, may have true knowledge of who they are. Because a people without an identity is a people who has been enslaved. Because if you don't have an identity, that means you don't know who you are. And when you don't know who you are, that means you don't know what you're doing. You don't know where you're coming from, neither do you know where you're going. So, history is one of the ways used in the privatization of traditional knowledge, Black African traditional knowledge. So people should search their history, and people should know their history. People should know where they come from, who they are, how Black African people were civilized, and how Black African people are supposed to be civilized. And then the second learning method of African traditional knowledge is what we call verbal knowledge or explicit knowledge. Right now, as I'm speaking, I might seem as if I'm speaking, but I am actually teaching these things that I'm teaching. This is the knowledge, this is the verbal learning method that I'm talking about. We have all been we have all experienced this verbal learning method. We have all gone to school ever since we were young. We have gone to school and we have had teachers in our classrooms teaching us about mathematics, teaching us science, teaching us English, Shona languages, African languages, all these things, geography. And then there would be two categories of learning. There will be theory, and then there will be practical. But the first thing that the teacher does or the tutor does is he gives people an introduction of whatever these people are learning. We call it verbal knowledge. And then he explains and elaborates the meaning, the purpose, the science behind. This is verbal knowledge. Verbal knowledge is also a learning method of African indigenous knowledge. Even storytelling, even music, even folk tales, myths, these are also ways of teaching African indigenous knowledge, and it's all verbal. So we need to start teaching our people. We need to change the education system. And the education system, the foundation of our African education system, should be based on these African indigenous knowledge systems, so that our true history of our identity as Black African people may be imparted upon the young, upon the children, so that they have a consciousness of who they are and knowledge of themselves as Black African people. Because right now, a Black African man has been colonized by Babylon system. The Black African men have been colonized by European culture. Black people, most of them, they are black outside, but they are white inside. They think like white people. White people are all about capitalism. White people are all about selfishness and greediness. White people are all about colonizing other people's resources, colonizing other people's minds, so that they dictate and tell people how they should act, what they should think, what they should eat, and how they should live, which is not aligned with the principles of the Creator himself. So Black African people have to wake up and know who they are. And the only way for Black African people to wake up is to know, to have knowledge of themselves through the learning of these African indigenous knowledge systems. Because these are the natural systems which we have been using ever since the ancient times as Black African people. Even Marcus Garvey, if you read Marcus Garvey wrote so many books about Black African history, Black African civilization. Marcus Garvey did a lot through his association called the Universal Negro Improvement Association. You should read on Marcus Garvey. You should learn African literature. Learn what Black African people, the works that the Black African people have done. Our heroes and heroines of the ancient past have done so many great works to uplift the people, to uplift the nation, to uplift Black African people, and to keep the legacy of the Black African tradition and the Black African culture. But many of us don't have the knowledge of that because we have been brainwashed to learn European things. We spend most of our times watching television, watching European channels, European movies, listening to European music, which is a good thing because culture is something which is, you know, interchangeable. Culture was meant to be exchanged, and we should also value other people's culture. Yes, because they're also human beings like us. But first of all, we have to stand on our culture first, our own identity first. If I'm praising a white man culture, somehow, I have to be standing on the foundation of my own culture, of my own identity. Because as long as I strip myself of my identity and then I start putting other people's cultures on pedestal, that means that I have lost myself. I have lost knowledge because I no longer know who I am and I no longer know what I am doing. So that means those people have an advantage over me. Those people can now use me and brainwash me and manipulate me through their culture. Because when they created this culture, we don't know what their motive was. Because we can see that the European culture is a culture which is meant to destroy the Black African mind, Black African mentality, which is knowledge of self and consciousness. So Black African people need to wake up. Black African people need to know who they are. And fathers, mothers, and everyone, our leaders, everyone, it's everyone's responsibility to make sure that this Black African knowledge, this Black African traditional knowledge is preserved for the future of the next generations, because our children need to know who they are. Our children need to know where they come from. Because if our children know who they are, and if our children know where they come from, that means our children will continue with the legacy of the great works. And all African societies will be changed, because Africa was one continent with no divisions, with no borders. All these divisions that is here in the African continent was created by the European who came here to colonize Africa in the scramble for Africa. The French and the British and the Spaniards. Yeah, man. They are the ones who came into Africa. And they are the ones who changed everything, who changed civilization. They destroyed our infrastructure. They destroyed our communities. They burned our houses, and they started teaching us false knowledge. And they gave us a Bible using missionaries, which were meant to colonize our minds so that we stop thinking for ourselves and listen to their rubbish. Look at how the African community is now. Everyone goes to church, but people are still suffering. So Black African people should wake up. Thank you. My name is Raymond Tichauya Muruira, and I bless you. Blessings to all of you. Thank you.